In this video, we are going to make this. You might think to yourself, well, that is just four 8x8 LED matrices that operate with the MAX7219 driver using the Raspberry Pi Pico in a 3D printed case. How unoriginal, it has been done before. Well, you are wrong. This project comes from Mr. Satan. Imagine you are a teacher, and every time you ask a question, no one wants to answer you. Well, not anymore. Simply take the random name generator from Hell 3000, select your class, and randomly call on a student in your lesson. Watch how they all sit there patiently as it slowly counts down to see who will be the next victim.
Hello everyone! I came across this Reddit post here while looking at cool projects, and this one here made by the username One Way Back Home, or Mr. Satan for short, grabbed my attention. This random name generator was done with the Arduino, and he has all the code available with the libraries used and schematic. So basically you can select your class, then random a student out of that class to call out on a student. Being a teacher myself for the last 3 years here in China, I thought this was an awesome project, but I was interested in recreating it with a Raspberry Pi Pico, which we will do today. For this project you will need the following: Raspberry Pi Pico board, MAX721 LED driver display module. You get single 8x8 displays, but this one has 4 modules connected, some jumper wires, breadboard to make the wires more secured, and you can remove one of these breadsticks so it can fit in the enclosure. You'll also need 2 buttons, and then a DC input to power a Raspberry Pi Pico from a DC power source. Now if you want, you can also power it through the USB. And then finally you will need this 3D printed case. The 3D printed case I designed in SolidWorks. I will include the 3D models if there is any changes you want to make with it in your favorite software. The module slides into the grooves, and there is enough space here inside to push in the whole breadboard with all the wires. I added 2 holes for the push buttons and a DC socket. In the future I will make a simple PCB to keep everything neat, and also maybe add a battery with a charger, but for now this will do. This is the project schematic. Make sure to connect the buttons in DC plug first. To secure the cable to the button, I have soldered all the pins with the DC socket. Then just connect them as indicated on the schematic table as a reference. Before we close the other half, we first need to upload the code, so we need to think, what do we need to create a random name selector? Well, we first need some library to control the MAX7219 modules. We need to store classes and then assign a name list to each class. For control, we will use the 2 push buttons, one button to go through each class, and then a second button to select a random name in that selected class. To control the MAX7219, I found this library written by Mike in MicroPython, so go and download his code on the GitHub repository, and then for the rest of the code just go to my GitHub page, and we are going to look at the code together now. So open Funny and let's get started. First, open the library you just downloaded and save it to your Pico. Now open the code from my repository. In this section of code, we import the MAX7219 library, and from the machine import the pin to set up a button for input and output, and the SPI to be used to communicate to our MAX7219. We also import random, as we will random a student's name from a student list in a specific class, and then we set up a variable called display so that we can use all the functions in our library, and finally here we can adjust the brightness of our screen. Very easy. Here we set up our 2 buttons, and I use pin 15 and 14, making both a pull down, which means they are currently low level and connected to ground, and once you press the button it will pull it up to 3.3 volt, giving it a high input. We will use one button to randomize a student in a student list, and then a second button to select a class. In this block of code we create a dictionary called classes, and the keys will be your class name and the items will then be your students. So here you can just go add your own classes and assign the items, which will be the student names in your class. This part we will make a default class and index number, so that is just to make sure when we do power up the Raspberry Pi Pico that a class is selected and that we start from an index of 0. Now let's move on to the main loop of our program. We will discuss this display image function last. I want to draw your attention to our two if statements that will execute once a button is pressed. First, let's look at button random student. First, we call a function countdown to count down from 5 to 1 before displaying the student's name. This is done in this function simply by making a list of what needs to be scrolled on the screen and then looping through the list. Just remember to read through all the comments in the code, and if you have any questions at any point, feel free to leave a comment on this video and I will get back to you. After the countdown, we create a random number depending on how many students are in that class, and select a student in our current selected class from the dictionary, and then we pass that student name to our display function, which is similar to our countdown function. For the button select class, once we press, we add a value of 1, and we use the modulus function by the number of classes to ensure that we will always loop through our classes. We then make sure our selected class is updated by accessing our dictionary keys by making a list of it, and then assign it to selected class, and then we pass that over to the display function to display the selected class. The last function, display image, I created to create a custom graphic, is based on this LED matrix editor online tool for editing and creating animations for an 8x8 LED matrices. The issue is we are working with a 32x8 matrix, and in our library we need to use the pixel.draw method to turn on an LED on an X and Y coordinate. For this we have to do the following. First, create the image you want to display. After you have saved the bits over to a 32-bit binary number by copying each row, we can send this to the display image to pass a list of 32-bit binary numbers that we will go through every row. We check each bit in every row. If the bit is 1, we send it to the getBit function to see if the bit is on or off. If it is on, we display the XY coordinate by using the display pixel function. That is all you will need to create a random name generator from HAL 3000. If you are new to the Raspberry Pi Pico and none of this made sense to you, don't worry. I will be making a complete beginner guide to the Raspberry Pi Pico on this channel someday. So hit the subscribe button and I will see you in the next video.